in her 80s. So she says, money rich comes and goes, and when you have it, it may not even make you happy. She says, but there's another kind of rich. It's rich in spirit, and that's when you believe there's enough to go around. You believe there's enough to share, and so you share. And she says, in the moments of sharing, that's when you're worth something. And she goes, when you grow older, you'll realize that you are not your bank account balance. You are not your cars. You are not your house. You are the gifts that you gave. You are the difference that you made. And that was a very powerful lesson she taught me. And what she said is that in your life, storm clouds gather. For those of you that like country music, that's the last song that Hank Williams Sr. ever wrote. It's called, he wrote it, I guess it was 2 weeks before he died in the back of that car. And there's a love letter to his wife. And it basically said, storm clouds gather and teardrops fall. You can't have everything forever. No one gets it all. And she told me this stuff that's going to happen in your life. You're going to make money, lose money. You're going to have healthy years and years you just don't know if you're going to get by. You're going to have dogs that are fantastic, and then they're going to die before you. She says, storm clouds gather. The only response you should ever have to adversity is generosity. She taught me that. One of the things she used to always quote Dr. Peel as to say is that giving is a wonder drug. Giving is a wonder drug. There is no ailment, no grief that can withstand the medicinal power of giving and helping other people. And research supports this. Case Western Reserve University. Stephen Post did a massive study on this. It's called High on Helping. When you volunteer, when you help, when you contribute to other people, especially those less fortunate than you, it triggers the reward center in your brain and unleashes a lot of chemicals that make you feel great. Dopamines, endorphins, and in particular something called oxytocin. They call that the bonding hormone. Moms have it at birth. It causes you to bond. Because when you help other people, you begin to realize how rich you really are and how wonderful human beings are, and you become much more empathetic as a person. So she taught me, when you're down, you give. In the book, I tell a story about a couple that faced incredible storm clouds in their life. The Clark family had an incredible tragedy happen. In 2004, their daughter, Sally, their only child, 17, Joe and David Clark's love of their life, was killed by a drunk driver coming home one night. They were so struck with grief, but Joe Clark decided that she wouldn't spend the next 3 to 4 years trying to get justice, trying to hate her way back, because she knew that wouldn't bring back Sally. They didn't know what they wanted to do, but what they knew they didn't want to do was let their own lives stop cold because of all this, because Sally wouldn't have wanted that. David had a dream about 6 months later, and he woke up, and he said, I know exactly what we need to do. Sally cared about physical fitness in church more than anything. She had knee surgeries, she'd had asthma, but when she went to camp once at a YMCA, she had finished a race courageously and inspired all of the kids. That's when she decided she could help other people and inspire other people, and she became a counselor. She loved to sing at church. So the values of the YMCA inspired them, and the Clarks realized, you know, here in East Lincoln, and I'm going to be there in a few days, in East Lincoln outside of Charlotte, there's no YMCA. So I saw they got to go to a camp. She didn't get to go to the Y like we did every day because there's not one here. So they realized, we're going to build a YMCA in Sally's honor. And they took all of their energy and all of their grief and pointed it towards a fundraising campaign. They had to convince the Charlotte YMCA they needed one in East Lincoln. They donated their own family property, and they went out and raised $7 million, much of it in the fall of 2008 when it was hard to raise money. And I'm proud to say that last month they launched it. It's called Sally's Y. You can even go to a website called sallysy.org. That's the name of the center. And what they realized is that you have a choice. You have a response to every situation. And in this case, giving East Lincoln a center for mind, spirit, and body, where thousands of people over the course of the next years will have value, is something that helps Sally live forever. The last thing I'll say, and I'll conclude with this idea, is that of all the lessons that Billy taught me that really changed my life, the one she taught me that was the coolest is this: give what you think you lack. She says, if you give what you think you lack, you'll trick yourself into realizing you've been fooled all along, because lack magnifies in your head. I don't have enough money, she says, then give more. I don't have enough time, then be a mentor. And this is a point I like to make, because a lot of us in here, you know, if there's a lack in your life, it may be lack of time more than anything. You know, so many of us are doing so much more with so much less, so lack of time is a serious issue, and it weighs us down. And I had a mentor in Dallas at a very important part of my life, Stanley Marcus Jr. And Mr. Marcus learned that with Neiman Marcus, every time there was a recession, their business went down 30, 40, 50%. I mean, you remember Neiman Marcus, or needless markups, depending on what you call it. Very expensive. He said, every time I would have these crises and you'd worry there's not enough time to go around, he said, the way I fixed it was I'd adopt a new mentee like you. And I'd give that mentee 2, 3, 4 hours a week of my precious time. He says, because I learned something. You'll never get dumber by making someone else smarter. And he says that when you can counsel a young man or a young woman in transition and show them the ropes and watch them grow and know that you're creating a ripple effect, he says you'll be a better time manager. He says, because when I realized that by going back and saying no to these 2-hour meetings and yes to the 40-minute sprint meetings where people actually make a decision and do something, he says, I take back my calendar and I realize that even though I'm being a mentor, I've got more time than I had to begin with. He said time management isn't just a bunch of tips and techniques, it's the fundamental respect for time. That time can change the world. It's the fundamental respect for time. So I challenge every one of you that are experiencing time scarcity, contribute some in your community to give. Billy practiced this, and I'll close with a story to illustrate how much she used giving as an antidote to her situation. I mentioned before we lost everything. When her husband left, like 6 months later, they repossessed our kitchen and our stove. It was a pretty brutal existence. We were, as they say, land rich and cash poor, but she was very rich in spirit. And one day, we were eating breakfast, and I see out of our window on our farm a stranger walking through our wheat field. He was a mountain of a man, walking slowly with his head down. My eyes got big. She noticed me seeing him, so she gathered me up. We went outside, and she met him just on the other side of the electric fence, just beyond the orchard. And she says, you know, because that's a tough woman. I mean, she's going to go meet him halfway. She's not going to let him come all the way to the house. So she says, can I help you? What's your name? He says, my name is Clarence. And he goes, I need a job, and I need a hot meal just today. She sized him up. She looked at the sky. I guess she figured it was a good time to start trusting men again. So for whatever reason, she invited him over the fence. He sat down at the card table in the peach orchard, folding chairs, and he told us his story. And his story was a tearjerker. He'd lost everything outside of Mott, Oklahoma in a family swindle. All he had was a pillowcase and his smile. He'd been walking for days, and no one trusted him. A stranger in a strange land, this guy had had dogs sicked on him, guns waved at him. No one helped him. He needed one person to trust him. So Billy said, I'll trust you. I'll give you a day's work. She goes, there's things that young Timotheus and I, she insisted on calling me that in my childhood. She goes, there's things that young Timotheus and I cannot do, like trimming the top of these peach trees, the trim on the barn, the heavy stuff in the front yard I want you to haul away. She goes, you do all this and I'll pay you $10 by sundown and I'll feed you. Well, I immediately became his foreman, kind of doing quality control and following him around, peppering him with questions, which mostly he replied with grunts, but he worked hard. He hung his ashy black coat up on a tree and went to work like a new hire. He did more than you could ever imagine, and when she brought out lunch, it was a bounty. I'll never forget, it was hot links and beans and mustard potato salad and Texas toast and sweet tea, and he treated it like a steak dinner. And the more he talked, the more he began to philosophize. And one of the things is he says, you pay attention to Miss Billy and how she trusts people and how she helps people. He says, see how happy she is? You'll be just like that if you do that when you grow up. I'll never forget that. He accomplished so much. When she came out at the end of the day, she marveled at all the work one man had done on our farm in a single day. So she said, Clarence, I told you for a good day's work I'll give you $10, but son, you've done a great day's work. So she pulled out of her granny purse, this is another thing you might recognize, that little zipper side pocket. Inside the zipper side pocket, folded over into a little tight square, was a $20 bill that she very carefully unfolded. She said, for a great day's work, I want you to have this. And she gave Clarence a $20 bill. That was a fortune to us at the time. Then, of course, she said, would you mind praying with us? Because she was a prayer warrior. If you get $20 out of her purse, you're on your knees with her for a half hour. I'm just saying. And it was interesting because she didn't think of things like social responsibility, like we talk about in our modern culture. She saw this as an opportunity. Her prayer was a thank you prayer. She was happy that Clarence came into our life. She was happy that we could be part of his great comeback, and she hoped that other families would do the same for him. So she gets up, I get up. Clarence is rocked by this situation. This is the last thing I think he thought was going to happen that morning when he probably got up that day in the ditch. So he stayed down on his knees. We noticed that his shoes were like plumb wore out. I mean, you can imagine this guy's walking for days. You could see his yellow-brown socks sticking out of the soles of his shoes. The holes were that big. She said when he finally got up, Clarence, before you leave, stop by the farmhouse. I have something for you. So when we got to the farmhouse, she's standing there on the porch holding her deceased father's brand new black wingtip shoes. He had bought them apparently before he died suddenly, and no one buries somebody in a brand new pair of shoes if you lived through the Great Depression. She's holding the black shoes saying, Clarence, I hope these fit. He sits down on our swinging porch. He pops them on like they were made for him. She dances a jig. He tousles my hair. He gets his pillowcase, and he walks off Highway 84 to the west. I'll never forget what happens next. She just gathers me up to her side, and she just squeezes me tight. And she says, Tim, as long as you live, don't you ever forget what happened today. She goes, because today we are rich. And I'm just saying that the spirit she had at church that weekend, her commitment to serve the community over the coming years, and her sense of confidence and self-worth really started again there. That's where she began to claim back her life. And that's what she meant when she told me that positive thinking is an outcome of how you live your life, from the moment you get up to how you interact with strangers. And I hope you read her story, and I hope you fall in love with her like I have and all the people of Clovis, New Mexico have over her 96 years. Thank you guys very much, and thanks very much for bringing me. Thank you.